Well, good afternoon, everyone. And well, firstly, thanks for inviting me along. Hopefully this will be of some use to you. It's not scientific, it's not veterinary, but it's sort of speaking about our experiences in the UK of a couple of outbreaks of foot and mouth disease. I think I must have been really bad in a former life to have actually had to deal with two outbreaks of FMD, but there we go. I thought I'd just put this up because I think even though pyre burning stopped in the end of May 2001 and we only pyre burnt or used pyres for disposal of about 29% of the animals that we culled in 2001, this pretty much is the image that the whole of the world thinks about foot and mouth disease. And I think it's just interesting that, you know, the power of images and the power of media and what that can do with trying to manage an outbreak. And don't forget that, because if you get the media on the wrong side, you're already going to be up against it. And of course, this was in 2001. We didn't have social media. We didn't have any of that. It'll be even worse the next time round. So what am I going to talk about? Just a few facts and figures about 2001 and 2007. And then this is sort of my personal sort of view, but also taking account of some of the reviews that were done of foot and mouth disease 2001 and 2007, and dig into a little bit of the elements of that disposal, a bit about vaccination. I'll leave Tom and Charles to, and well, Brian's already told you a lot about that, but just touch on our thoughts on vaccination and a few reflections at the end. But these are just, you know, the outbreak in numbers. So over 10,000 holdings affected, and when we've been affected, that means culled out. A hell of a lot more were affected by movement controls, restrictions for a long period of time. And a lot of you guys in the audience, hopefully you won't, if ever you get it, but hopefully you won't actually be one of those that get the disease, but you will be affected both because of the zoning, but also potentially, well, it will be because of trade. The way that was split, we call them infected premises. So that's where we get disease confirmed. There are over 2,000 of them, and that includes the 4 in Northern Ireland. Dangerous contacts, those are where we assessed that there was plausible contact between the infected premises and the other premises, and we culled them out preemptively, if you like, based on epidemiological links. And then we had a policy at the time of culling out contiguous premises, so those that were next door, so where there was nose-to-nose spread, or sorry, nose-to-nose contact. Our policy has eased a bit, and we don't automatically cull contiguous premises because that's quite a subjective approach. We might have to get to that if it gets big and bad, but we would always cull out on dangerous contacts. And you'll see that's a sort of a 1 to 2. Sometimes it's a higher ratio than that. And that's just a little sort of histogram of the number of cases by week, you know, peaking at 300 cases a week. And you know, we're in the middle of what we consider to be the worst avian influenza outbreak. We don't get that many in a week. We don't get that many in a year. So just think through that. The impact of a big bad outbreak is significant. First case, 20th of February 2001, I can still remember where I was. I was giving a lecture on sewage sludge recycling at the time, how worlds change. Killed nearly 6.5 million animals. It was an epidemic predominantly in sheep in the UK at that time. And the problem with the sheep was that the clinical signs were harder to spot. And that was part of the problem with spread. A lot of cattle, a lot of pigs, and various bits of other diseases. And then the last case was in 30th of September, and it lasted 221 days. Money is always important to government, of course, but it's, you know, estimated to have cost £5 billion, and of that, 3 billion was to government. You will see figures up to 9 million. It just depends on how you do the sums there and how much of trade. and how much tourism impact you build into that, because there was a significant impact on tourism. People saw those flames, thought the UK was on fire. We didn't get any tourists from North America, and rural economies really, really suffered. UK and GB is a tiny little place compared to Canada, so those distances are nothing, but you can just see the geographic spread of those outbreaks in the UK. So big parts of the country were affected. The way our livestock industry is organised, most of the grazing cattle are on the left-hand side of the country, on the west. Most of the pigs and poultry are on the east, where it's drier and arable. All the west of the country is grassland. So we tended to get bigger impacts on the western side. So though I think it was 44 counties were affected by the disease. And operational resources, so that's obviously people. 2,000 vets, 7,000 admin and technical staff. We used the military because we needed to get those extra resources in. You need valuers to value the cattle. You need slaughtermen to slaughter the cattle. And I think if you look at the number of vets, which is so that's the number of vets deployed, you'll see we were behind the curve all the time, trying to get those vets on the ground to work with us, get on top of the disease. And the one thing I would urge you to do is think through how you get that surge capacity early on, because that's a killer. Particularly, Brian said it's so infectious. If it takes off, you're always behind the curve. And that's where we got those vets. So this bit at the bottom is government vets. You could see, compared to what we needed, government vets ain't going to be enough. So you need to work out how to fit this void. So this is I guess, pointing at government mainly, but clearly private vets are going to have to work with government to control this. So we need a way of getting private vets to work with government to deliver this response. And so what we do, so we've got our own APHA vets, our government vets. We would then bring in locum vets from, if you like, self-employed locum vets. But we have a thing called the Veterinary Delivery Partnership. So that's us working with a range of veterinary practices across the UK. So those guys in peacetime do most of our TB testing. They do much of our routine surveillance work. And so we would then deploy them straight into outbreak response. We haven't used them much during avian influenza because we haven't needed to, and it's actually been more important that they get on with TB control and other sorts of activities, but they're going to be our first go-to. We've got the IAHER, the International Animal Health Emergency Reserve, and so that's Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, and the Republic of Ireland. So that's working together, where if we put the call out, we hope some of you guys will come and help us. And if you put the call out, hopefully some of our guys will come and help you. But I think that international working together is really, really important. And, I've worked with Tom over the years, too many years, I think, Tom. But, trying to work up those reserve, those working together. And now we're part of the Quadrilateral Alliance. It's good to work more closely together with those like-minded countries. And how do you put all those contracts in place? We were way behind the curve in terms of putting contracts in place, and we were done over by a lot of people because we didn't have contracts. They knew that we needed them, and so we paid over the odds for a lot of things. So again, part of preparation, get those frameworks in place, know who you would be working with, and get those sort of arrangements. You'll still have to pay a bit more, but really, really important to get those contracts in place. And that's just one of the airfields that we commandeered / bought. This particular one ended up being a mass burial site, so we used the runways for parking, and the bits in between the runways we ended up digging burial pits, etc. But huge numbers of vehicles, equipment, a whole range of stuff that you just don't think about otherwise. 2007 was bad in its own way, but tiny compared to 2001. It just happened to be just down the road from me. You all know where it originated from, so we're not going to go into that. But 8 infected premises, all in Surrey, so that's the southeast of England, so this tiny little place down here. It's not even an agricultural county, it's really, commuter belt. But even so, it was bad enough and obviously had a huge impact on our agricultural industries, just even though it was only in the south. And a lot of surveillance required, obviously, and still a lot of work. And even that, with 8 infected premises, I think we culled animals on 20 premises. So Brian put that slide up about IP to A, B and C. We sort of cheated a bit, and we called them IP, A, B and C, where there were different parts of the same business, the same premises. So they were all part of the same holding, it's just they had 2 different sort of epidemiological units. In other days you might say, there were 12 infected premises or whatever. It doesn't really matter how you define them, but there were 8 businesses affected and plus some dangerous contacts. We were able to keep it out of Northern Ireland, which was good, and Northern Ireland were able to continue to trade as a free part of the UK, and obviously we would look to do that again if it happened again. And I think this is where zoning, regionalisation is so important, and I know Tom's done a huge amount of work on that, but it's something that we need to work together to continue to get trade in bits of country that aren't affected. And part of our role in government and your role as producers and like-minded people is to demonstrate that those controls are in place and are being adhered to, because otherwise trading partners won't believe it. So it's got to be credible right the way down to the guy on the ground with the cattle lot or whatever. They pay their part, because otherwise it's the lowest common denominator will kill the rest of us, if you like. It was a strange outbreak. There was sort of, and Brian's alluded to the sort of the missing IP. We thought we'd pretty much controlled it after the first phase, and we lifted our last surveillance zone. So perhaps I should say a little bit about our disease control strategy. So you have a infected premises in the middle. We put a 3-kilometre, what we call a protection zone around it, and then a 10-kilometre surveillance zone around that. And obviously if you get more IPs, you get funny shaped sort of zones. I think it's fairly common around the world. And we adopt a culling out or a stamping out policy. So this was our first August cluster, and we lifted the last SZ, and there was that sort of, thank goodness for that. It wasn't too bad, was it? And then on the 12th of September, just as the chief vet had said, we've lifted the last zone, we think we're good, we get another one. And I think the genetic sequencing that we've now got to look at missing IPs and things are going to be so valuable going forward in helping us to know where we're at with all of that. And the final SZ was lifted in November, and we culled 2,160 animals. That's still 2,160 too many, but compared to the 6.5 million, it was hardly anything. And that's partly because it wasn't an agricultural area, so they were mainly relatively small herds, relatively self-contained units, no markets involved. So what are some of the key lessons from all of that? Well, obviously it was devastating. I don't think I need to sort of say anything about that. We had actually learnt, which is quite unusual for government, I think, to learn lessons between 2001 and 2007. So we were much better prepared, and I think 2007 would have been a lot worse if we hadn't done all of that work. The question is keeping that momentum going, keeping everyone up to date. Because I remember in 2001, I was initially an agricultural advisor, and I got seconded into government and never escaped. But everywhere you went, everyone had disinfectant in the boot. Everyone washed and disinfected. Everyone said, "Where's your tap? Where can I wash my boots?" etc. By 2010, that had all gone. And it's so difficult to work together with producers just to remind them of that importance, because you've got to be on your game all the time. Some of the lessons, and I'll pick up on some of these, and shout at me when I'm running out of time. I get a bit carried away if I'm not careful. So it's about planning for various scenarios. It's about swift and timely response. I think Brian mentioned, and you can't underestimate the importance of rapidity and speed. You must work together. Agencies need to collaborate. Government need to collaborate with industry. Industry need to collaborate with their colleagues. Agencies need to work together. Law enforcement needs to work with Environment Agency. Everyone has to work together. Otherwise, you won't control it, or you won't do it as quickly and as economically as you should do. And don't forget the impact on non-farming businesses. I think we as government had underestimated the impact that an animal disease can have on rural communities. That's down to the local garage, who couldn't sell any gas to anyone, down to the local contractor who had no business, even down to sort of local services that couldn't go and support the elderly, couldn't go and deliver Meals on Wheels and things. The whole of industry, sort of rural industry, sort of imploded, and it took a hell of a lot to get them back on their feet. So don't forget the impact on them. It's very easy as agriculturalists, farmers, etc., to think about yourselves, but all those businesses that rely on you as livestock producers, they're going to be hit as well, directly or indirectly. And of course, don't forget trade. I suppose it's quite nice when a lessons learned report said, we found much to applaud. On balance, okay, so it was damned with faint praise, I suppose, the positives easily outweighed the negatives. So I think we had learnt some stuff. And the key from the 2001 review was about data management, making good use of the data and the information. And if I get time, I'll just talk a little bit about that. And the importance of local decision making. This will come up again in other slides, but make sure the decisions are made at the right place. It's so easy for the guys on the ground to say, not my problem, it's them up in London that's making all those decisions. And every decision gets lifted up to the top, so it's the CVO gets to make decisions that really should be made by local veterinarians. So make sure that decisions are made at the right place. And something about scalability of response. So be prepared. I think we've spoken about that. React at pace. We've now got tried and tested and updated plans in place. Obviously, you need to make sure you've got the right legislation to enable you to do what you want to do, and you need to get that done in peacetime. Data information and management, and I've got a slide, I think, on culling and disposal. But in 2001, at the centre, we didn't know what was going on in some of those areas. And on times, that meant that they were ahead of the game, and on times they were behind the game, and we didn't really know, and we couldn't make those strategic decisions to deploy resources to where they were needed. Because as local managers, the local guy will say, I think I'll just keep those guys for a bit longer just in case. And actually you've got to get that culture to move them on to where the real need is. And that's where you need central oversight, but local management. And so I'd stress that. You must base the decisions on science. And we're so lucky to have Pirbright, with us, working with us, in the tent with us, using, Brian's expertise, his colleagues, Don will be on the phone to us, every day, all day. We get the disease consultant to be part of all of our case management decisions, all of our strategic discussions, so that they can put their expertise in. We need the National Reference Lab. We need that capability, but we also need that expertise. And the real danger is that expertise can only be one deep. And Brian will tell me I'm not paying him enough to keep that expertise, too deep, because we know that it's a bit thin. So again, if you can influence people, try and get some extra resource and resilience in there. We've now got a contingency plan, and importantly, we update it annually. Legally now we have to update our contingency plan every year, and we have to consult on it if we change. It's good practice anyway, but it's a really good discipline to have it in law to make us actually do that. And then we've got our control strategy. Preparedness. You need people to be worrying about this every day. I used to be in this role. I used to be head of contingency planning before I moved across to the dark side into policy. But someone needs to wake up each morning and worry about, where am I going to get that next valuer from? Where am I going to get those contracts from? So have a dedicated team doing for it, and then exercise it. Exercises are really, really important. And we try and put those exercises in place to put a safe environment, because I've been lucky enough or unlucky enough to deal with 2 FMD outbreaks in one shape or form. I'm just doing avian influenza now. But if you hopefully don't have one for a while, you don't get the opportunity to play. You don't have the opportunity to make those mistakes. Make them in an exercise, but make that exercise really challenging, but really supportive of colleagues. So have a difficult exercise, but be supportive of each other. And I personally don't like mixing training with exercises. I think you should train people and then exercise that training rather than do the hybrid thing together. But that's just a personal view. So our next national exercise is going to be a 1 day over 2 days exercise. We call all exercises after trees for some reason. So London Plain is going to be in September. Looking forward to it already. And we test our wider capabilities through other diseases, because we've had quite a lot of experience of avian influenza, unfortunately, and that tests good local communication, but it doesn't test avian FMD surveillance. It doesn't test bleeding cattle. It doesn't test how on earth am I going to sample all those cattle in the middle of a field without any crushes or anything. We had to make that up in 2007. We had a fleet of mobile crushes on the back of trailers to just do the surveillance activity. You need to think about that before it's too late. I think I've mentioned training and development, but also surge volunteers, and that's not just on the ground. You've also got to get surge volunteers into teams like mine. I've got 20 odd people in my team. That's fine for a small outbreak, but we would fall over very, very soon if we couldn't surge in like-minded colleagues. C3, command control communication. So you don't need to know about this, but this is sort of our command and control. I can't even make this thing work now. So strategic at the top, so the grown-ups, the ministers, the COBRA, you'll have possibly heard, when government goes into crisis, we have a thing called COBRA, the Cabinet Office briefing rooms. That's where the Prime Minister or the Secretary of State chairs those meetings. I would sit somewhere in here in the National Disease Control level, partly strategic, partly tactical. And then our National Disease Control Centre, that decides what needs to be done. How it needs to be done, and these guys deliver it, and these decide what needs to be done. And then on the ground, you've got all those agencies that need to work closely together. And to get that running, you need information to flow from the bottom to the top, and you need command to flow from the top down to the bottom. And what you'll find is that if you're not careful, you get layers of blockage. So layers of blockage with the information going up, and layers of blockage from that message coming down. So again, make sure you've got those channels of communication so that you've got those key messages of the day that's delivered right the way down, but also interpreted in the right sort of language. So those buggers in London want us to do this. This is what we've got to go away and do it. So you've got to work with your teams to deliver that using language that's meaningful to the people that you're talking to. And I think communication is so important. I mentioned empowered decision making, decisions made at the right level. I can't stress that enough. Otherwise, you will just everything will cease because nobody can make those decisions and everyone's waiting for someone else to make a decision, and you lose time. Record the decisions and the reasons you made them. They may be wrong, but no one's going to criticise you after the event for making a decision in a timely way based on the best available evidence. It might find out to be wrong, but if you don't make a decision and record that, you will just get inertia again. And what you'll find is every single lessons learned communication should be better or could be better. But put a lot of time into communication. Just a little bit about Brian mentioned FMD is quick. It is quick, but there's still that silent spread period between an animal being infected and showing clinical signs. And you won't be able to see this, but in 2001, markets were incredibly important, or devastating, I suppose is the word. So the 6 markets there, those square markets, and the white arrows are moves that were made between the first pig getting infected up here somewhere and it being found in an abattoir down here somewhere. All those moves had happened. So pigs had infected sheep in the next door field. Those sheep had gone to market. Those sheep had been mixed with other sheep. It had gone to another market. It had gone to all these other markets. And so even before we'd confirmed disease on the 20th of February, we believe we had disease on at least 20 holdings, probably more, and it had gone through all of those holdings. The other thing is those red lines are the moves that happened between the 20th of February and the 23rd of February when we put our national movement ban in place. So those farmers of you out there, they thought, oh, we've got foot and mouth disease. All our cattle are in the wrong place. Our sheep are in the wrong place. Let's move them. Perfectly natural thing to do, but it was the wrong thing to do in terms of disease spread. So again, we got long distance moves of sheep in the main moving disease around the country again. So we will put in place a national movement ban on confirmation, and then we'll have to row back from that. We know that we can't keep it in place for long, but until we know how big and bad and how we've done some of that epidemiological tracing, it's just not worth the risk of getting disease spreading all around the countryside. So I don't know what your policies are, but that's what we're going to do, and we've got a relatively small place, but move forward. As a result of that, we also introduced what we call movement standstill. So as part of business as usual, if you move cattle or sheep, they've got to stay where they've moved to for 6 days. What we don't want is cattle moving on and being sold on and split and moved on. Obviously, moves to slaughter are relatively low risk or very low risk, so that's not a problem. And again, we need to work through how we're going to manage regionalisation and things like that to allow slaughtering to continue. We also improved cleansing and disinfection, C&D, at markets and in transporters, because again, standards have slipped. There weren't facilities in place. So again, every market needs those washing facilities. Every abattoir needs those facilities, and we will monitor and manage that. How long have I got? 10 minutes. Good. 20. Whoa, keep going. So early reporting and rapid response. I think we all know that early diagnosis is absolutely key. So everyone in this room has a role in that early reporting. Know your stockman. For those of you that are farmers, when your animals are off. For God's sake, phone your vet and get a second opinion. because what we don't want is what we had in 2001, where through whatever reason, partly because I suspect there was some illegal activity going on in terms of non-compliance will feeding, etc., or perhaps it was just a blinkered mindset, but it wasn't reported. Early reporting is for the good of everyone. Vets, inspectors at abattoirs, we picked ours up at an abattoir. A drover said, I don't like the look of that. The OV knew what they were talking about, phoned it in, and we picked it up at that stage. If he hadn't picked that up, those pigs had gone through and probably would have been even worse, if that's possible. Roles of, lab and post-mortem investigation services. So I'm sure you've got your surveillance systems, where you've got sort of scanning surveillance, veterinary scanning surveillance. They are eyes and ears of looking at odd things. Okay, so maybe they're looking mainly at new and emerging threats, but really important for picking up those early sign lesions, etc. So what we do if we, it gets reported in, obviously it's a mandatory requirement to report it, but we'll send our vets out to sample. If they can't negate it on clinical grounds, we'll take samples, send them to Brian and colleagues, because obviously Pirbright is our national reference lab for FMD, along with most of our other vesicular diseases. And the CVO has the powers to declare what we call a temporary control zone. So one of those 10-kilometre zones, but we call it a temporary control zone, and we would do that before confirming disease. So this is to stop that starburst effect. So we'll put in place the same controls right on suspicion. And actually, because I got an email from Tom to say, I see you put a TCZ in place and lifted it again. Was it SVV? He was right, of course. It was Seneca Valley virus that was there, but we didn't know at the time. We didn't know it was foot and mouth disease, so we went in hard, and that's what we'll always do, because I think another message is go in hard. You can always ease back. You can't do it the other way round. So it may be impactful on businesses, but you will actually thank us in the long run. And we as government work really, really closely with our industry. We have a group pool, a core group. So those are representatives from industry. They're experts. Some of them are part of trade associations. Some of them are there just because they're experts. And we have vets. We have all of the major species sector groups there. And we share everything with them up front, in a Chatham House environment, and we make much, much better policy as a result of that. We don't always listen to them. We always listen to them. We don't always do what they want us to do, but we'll always listen to them. And in outbreaks, we meet every day. We used to meet in person, but Teams has been really good at that. And even now, we're meeting our avian core group once a week, even though, we haven't had a case for a while in England. Scotland haven't been so lucky. So we've put in place those default zones. Diagnostic testing, again, I can't underestimate the importance of that, having the expertise that we've got through Brian's team at the National Reference Lab. And it's even better that, they're also the FAO World Reference Lab and every other accolade that I think you can get. I think I've covered all the other things. Scientific advice is important, essential. Pirbright obviously do the vaccine matching for us because we've got to decide very early on whether we're going to make that antigen into vaccine and cost ourselves £1 million up front, not knowing whether we're going to use it or not. And we've still got this question about pen-side testing, lateral flow devices, LAMP, etc. We currently don't do pen-side testing. We revisit it every year. We're getting very close to it with Seneca Valley virus in pigs, where we might actually do a differential to rule out FMD and swine vesicular disease. We haven't rolled it out yet, but we're very close to thinking about rolling that out. It's a really difficult thing for the vet doing that test. And I think if we do roll it out, we'll find a way of coding the result. So even the vet or the guy on the ground doing the test doesn't know what the result is, because that puts them in a terrible place with the farmer saying, what's the result, what's the result? So that's our thoughts at the moment. Be interested to know what you guys think, and maybe that's a discussion point for later. Obviously, we've got a stamping out policy if we're not doing vaccination. You've got to think about how you value those stock. We still value with a valuer. We're thinking about rate cards and just having a standard thing. That's really hard for people with high quality stock, and because you can only pay the average. So some people lose, some people gain. But in an outbreak, it's really, really hard to get enough people to do it quickly enough. And you make a whole load of people dirty. And you make it much harder risk to move stuff about. For avian influenza, bird flu, we're valuing everything remotely. So we're taking photos, and the valuers are valuing remotely now. And I think that's what we'll probably move to. Obviously, who's going to kill those animals on the farm? We haven't got as many slaughtermen we used to have. So that worries me a bit. And you've got that whole disposal of carcasses going forward. So a little bit about that. The top two are where we started in 2001. Pretty much everything was buried and burnt because that's what the old rules said, and you just got rid of them as quick as you could. What we found is that those on-farm burials, we were burying them on top of susceptible water courses and stuff, so we had to dig some of them up again. And those pyres, once we'd finished burning them, we dug a hole and buried the ash. My job in 2001 was managing the aftermath of all of that. So we had to go and do risk assessments for every pyre site. And I managed a £38 million contract digging it all up again because it was either buried in the wrong place, or there were suspect BSE animals, or animals that could have had BSE and the prions may not have been controlled. So we had to dig it all up again. So that's where you need to be prepared to start with, because otherwise you've got a hell of a legacy to clear up afterwards. We then moved to rendering. Because we thought that we didn't have enough capacity, we built quite a lot of mass burial sites. We did also use most of the mass burial sites, but one was never used because we didn't have as many cattle left on the ground as we thought we had, because the message hadn't got to top of the house quickly enough to say that they'd actually been disposed of. We tried air curtain burners. They didn't really work, but they were okay. Fixed plant incineration, large animal incineration, fantastic, but there's not enough of them. And we use licensed landfill as well in contained landfill. That's how we got rid of the bodies, if you like. 29% by pyres, 28% rendering, 22% landfill, 18% by burying. The sad thing is that I did the analysis after the event. On only one day did we optimise our rendering capacity. And that's because we didn't use transport logistics managers early enough. So again, another message: if you're trucking stuff about, get some people that know about logistics, know about transport to help you. Vets and people like me don't know how to manage contracts for transport. Get the experts in. And this was our problem. So this is the blue line is what we killed. That's what we disposed of. And that's what we had left to dispose of. And these were sitting on farm. So at one stage we had 130,000 animals sitting on a farm, gradually decomposing. That's horrible from a public health perspective. And just think what that's like to the farmers, who that's their life work and their grandfather's genetic input to that. That's soul destroying, and mental health is a huge, huge issue during outbreaks. And I would urge you to look at that whole health and well-being, not only of farmers but also of vets as well. And that's why we needed landfill, etc. So we've done a lot of work at looking at disposal routes. And unlike you guys, we don't have access to composting. So it's just not a legislative option that we've got. I think I might be tempted to use it as a pre-treatment before I do something else if we get stuck again. But we've done a lot of work looking at source pathways of different disposal routes, looking at optimization. But wherever you get rid of the bodies, if I can use that crude term, you need protocols for disposal. You need to look at the biosecurity. You need to look at the legislative basis, because again, we buried things where we shouldn't have done. So we then had to retrofit that with the agencies. Must think about public health, absolutely vital. One Health applies even to carcass disposal. Think about the environment, because we're still managing the legacy of 2001 and some of those disposal sites. And look at access and routing, because you certainly don't want to. If we dispose off farm by and large now, you don't want to truck infected carcasses through high density livestock unit areas. All of our routes are controlled by the police, and we have escorts for each of those things. This is my only slide on vaccination. I'm sure we'll speak about it later. We are legally obliged to consider vaccination, so that's good. We have to consider it. But it's a really, really complex decision. Our farmers hate the idea of vaccination, or certainly vaccination to live, because they think that their animals are going to be worth a lot less, and they may well be. So it's a real negative driver from farming industry. We're told by our retailers that there won't be a problem, and we know that we sell vaccinated meat on all sorts of things, but there's always that slight worry. But if you vaccinate too early in the wrong place, it delays getting country freedom. It's a waste of money, and you've vaccinated a whole load of animals you don't need to vaccinate. So it's a really, really difficult decision, and you've got to make those decisions really early on. So I think, we've got a vaccine bank. It's a small vaccine bank. I think that if Brian tells me that we've got a match for one of the strains in our bank, and we haven't got 20 strains in our bank. We've done a lot of work with Don King to do that expert elicitation to work out what we should have in our bank, but we may not be lucky. We might be knocking on the door of the Canadian bank at some stage. You might be knocking on our bank. I'm really pleased that we've signed that agreement, by the way. So we've got parts of the country where we think we would almost certainly vaccinate, because we know the modelling says that R0 is going to be nearer the 10 than nearer the 1.5. But equally, there's bits of the UK where we probably wouldn't vaccinate, because it's just not going to take off if we apply all those control measures and if we apply stamping out policy. And we're still like this between vaccinate to kill and vaccinate to live. The public is going to be really on our case if we do vaccinate to kill, because they're going to say, you spent all that money, you've vaccinated these animals, they're not going to get sick again, they could go into the food chain and live a happy life evermore. But our instinct is still for trade and all sorts of others to do vaccinate to kill. And vaccinate to kill might be important because we haven't got enough slaughtermen and disposal capacity. So it's a really difficult decision. So I hope we don't have to make one again in any time soon. And it depends on part between geographical spread, the animal population density, and the strain of the virus and what it's spreading. And again, that's where we rely on Brian and his colleagues to tell us about the infection dynamics, how it's spreading, what the spread is. Is it a strain that's particularly airborne? Does it spread on those aerosols? Is it a strain that we're going to see clinical signs early on? Because if you can see the clinical signs really early on, and if we can do Brian's testing up front, we might not need vaccination. We might be able to get ahead of the game and do a stamping out policy. Because we'll do both. It's not either or. It's stamping out with or stamping out on its own. I am nearly finished. Again, don't forget the recovery phase. And the recovery phase starts at the beginning of the response phase. So you need to think about who's going to manage your recovery. So I'm responsible for, if you like, the recovery for the animal health bits. So cleansing and disinfection, restocking, and all those sorts of things. I haven't got the expertise to deal with rural infrastructure. You've got to get the experts in managing rural infrastructure to work with you on that recovery of those things, and look for all the other sorts of support, whether it's tax breaks, changes to VAT or whatever, to help support those rural businesses. I've got enough on my plate worrying about animal health. You need to bring other people in to do that. Restoring international trade, that's got to start from day one. You've got to have all those discussions with your trading partners. You've got to build that rapport. You've got to give them all the information that they want, and you've got to be open and transparent. Don't try and hide it. We publish pretty much everything because we think it's far better to be transparent, open and honest, and have a reputation for telling it as it is. Restocking. Don't forget other diseases exist. We made our TB problem a hell of a lot worse because of 2001. And that was partly because we didn't do much testing, because everything was locked down or whatever. But also, I'm afraid farmers said, I need some more animals, and they bought them from wherever, because a live animal was better than no animal. But they brought in a huge amount of endemic disease, whether it be TB or other endemic diseases. So just think through, biosecurity includes sourcing the best quality stock and test it before you bring it in. So just a word of warning there. You'll have seen all this sort of stuff, but we work on the basis of a cycle of understanding. So do the evidence-based stuff, do the research, get the right experts, listen to them. It's far better to prevent disease in the first place than try and deal with it. So that means biosecurity at the border, biosecurity at the farm level, biosecurity at markets, only trading good, clean animals, etc., and communicate that. Detect it early. So you need the capacity, you need to know what you're looking for, you need the vets to be able to do those differentials. And then when you do have to get to respond to it, make sure you're prepared. And don't just wait till 18 months later to do your lessons learned. Continuous improvement's really, really important, because you can make a lot of changes as you evolve through an outbreak and involve industry. And this is my last slide, promise. So these are some personal reflections. You must have robust plans. And I would always plan for the credible worst case scenario. Know what you would do in that, but not necessarily have the people on the ground to be able to deliver that, because you probably won't get it. But you need to plan on how you would get there if that happened, and you need to have the modelers to help decide, along with the epidemiologist and the vet, to say, is this going to be a 10%er, a 50%er, or a 95%er? Because we still think 2001 was a sort of a 90%er. Our realistic worst case scenario is about 1,000 IPs, plus probably another 3,000 dangerous contacts. So that's what in our head we're planning for. We don't think it's going to be as bad as 2001 because of all the other stuff. Command, control and coordination, react at pace. I think I probably said most of this. Go hard. Decision making at the right place. Every outbreak is different. So, I'm a bit grey in the head. I've seen a lot of outbreaks, but everyone is different, and you've got to think of it, everyone uniquely, bringing in the right experts. Make your decisions based on evidence. Bring the experts into the tent. Far better to have them working with you rather than briefing against you. Share everything, share the information with them. Okay, so there's some confidentiality about, names, addresses and all that sort of stuff, but it's really, really important that they've got the key information about the virus dynamics, where it is, what those transmission pathways are. Deploy surge early. and worry about resilience. I'm very bad at doing this and very good at saying it, but be wary of burnout and look after your colleagues, whether they be a fellow farmer down the road who's really suffering from what's going on around them. Put that support infrastructure in place and give them a rest. They'll want to come back and they may not want to have a rest, but maybe it's a bit harder to do a farmer, but just get that help and support in there. Have rotas, have deputies. Adrenaline will take you through for 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. It won't take you any longer than that, and you'll do some serious damage to people. And communication, both in business as usual, peacetime, i.e. now, and that's why I love coming to these sort of things, because you get fantastic discussion. I always learn stuff, and this is part of communication. It's about thinking things through. What would we do? And it can always be improved. So thank you very much.